Group 10 Masters Part 2, Expanding Our Consciousness from Human to Soul to Spirit, video by Dr. Lisa Love. In the previous video, Group 10 Masters Part 1, we briefly covered some of what the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali that Bailey wrote an interpretation on called The Light of the Soul, and the book The Bhagavad Gita that Bailey intended to write a commentary on before she passed away, had to say about what it required to become a master. And here you see the book that we used in that video, God Talks with Arjuna, the interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita by Paramahansa Yogananda. And the important thing in that video was that we were learning that as we move, especially into groups 8, 9, and 10, we are learning to control the mind at will. We're not just watching thoughts go by like clouds in the sky. We're learning to understand what we're thinking, why we're thinking it, to select our thinking, and to think whatever we direct our minds to think at will. That is what happens at mastery. We also have steadfast realization of the self. Now, in this video, we're going to go over what that self is again, but it's essentially at this stage of mastery, the true self, it's sometimes called, or the triad, or Satchitananda. And at mastery, there is no wavering in understanding that we are that self. We are anchored in that 24/7, 365 days of a year, though at mastery, this idea of a year doesn't really apply so much because we have more of a sense of timelessness. We maintain equanimity, and at mastery, we're able to do that at all times. The highs and lows of life no longer disturb or disrupt our emotions or our mind or take us off purpose or task in terms of service to the plan. We are able to maintain equanimity at all times. We're able to move into a state of bliss or Ananda Samadhi on the Buddhic plane at will. And I have a whole series, Understanding Samadhi. It's important to know Samadhi and the different stages of Samadhi. Again, in our Soul Magic series, or the Treatise on White Magic series, as it used to be called 100 years ago. In our videos, we called it Soul Magic. But in those videos, we learned that understanding Samadhi is the basic step to begin soul magic. And at mastery, we know how to do soul magic at all times. And our duties in the outer world are performed as that self. No matter what we do, we have that sense of inclusivity of all life, and we are performing identified with that self and all life. And we know that there is no death factually. It's not just a near-death experience that we've had or a drug experience that has moved us into an altered state, or maybe we got an altered state in meditation. It is knowing how to enter and exit out of the physical body at will at any time, because that's how much we know there is no death. So that's a quick summary of video 1. If you want to go back and look at that part 1 video, you are free to do so. We're also able to enter and out of the physical realm at will. So in this video, we're going to now look at what Alice Bailey said regarding who masters are. But before we do that, I'd like to speak about masters of wisdom in general. Now, the notion that there are masters of wisdom originated with Helena Blavatsky and the theosophical tradition that Alice Bailey was a part of. Now, masters are also known as Mahatmas or elder brothers, adepts, members of the White Lodge in theosophy. Now, some of these terms may seem pejorative in 2025 when this video was done. This book that we're going to draw things from was done in 1920, and the idea of masters of wisdom originated around the 1860s. So back then, everybody everywhere used the male pronoun for everybody, and so don't let that trip you up. And to be less pejorative, when I talk about things like white and black magic or white and black lodges in this time period, I talk about it more as white equals soul, black equals personality, to distinguish between the selflessness, spiritualized state of being and the selfish, separative state of being, because that's what the words white and black really meant back then. They had nothing to do with skin color. Essentially, masters are thought to be enlightened beings who have achieved absolute wisdom and attained a high level of spiritual initiation. Though they could move beyond our planetary sphere in their consciousness, they choose to remain in contact with humanity to act as spiritual guides to help accelerate the evolution of the human soul and promote the divine plan, which has to do with helping humanity evolve in such a way the needs of our overall planetary logos, a word used for our planet, back then our Earth, are met. Masters work on inner spiritual planes and sometimes incarnate in human form to guide societal movements and promote altruism, selflessness, sharing, peace, and other spiritual principles. And due to their high stage of self-realization, it is a great sacrifice for them to remain in our world to serve. That would be like Einstein taking time to teach basic addition to children. It's not where their consciousness is usually focalized, so to have to shrink their consciousness down to matters that they're not so much concerned with is a great sacrifice for them. And that Einstein to teaching arithmetic is probably an exaggeration. I don't really know how much that would be applicable, that great sense of exaggeration to this. Despite what many people think, ascended masters care little for the physical lives and desires of their followers. Any channeled teachings from so-called masters or elevated beings that make promises of how to get perfect health, limitless wealth, and personal happiness are actually teaching the exact opposite of what the original theosophical teachers, Blavatsky, Besant, Bailey, taught about these masters. The only thing they're concerned with is finding and contacting people that are capable of serving the overall plan of helping our Earth evolve. Other people, they don't care about. So any other channeled teachings that tend to step that down or personalize that are not coming from the masters according to the original teachings by Blavatsky, Besant, and Bailey. According to the original teachings by Blavatsky, Besant, and Bailey. Now here we're going to take a look at the charts that we use. This is the original chart to the left by Bailey. This is one that I have done to try and highlight these major distinctions of the personality, which is all of these subplanes here, the egoic lotus or soul, which is here, the spiritual triad where the masters are going to be, which is here, and the monad, which is up here, which we'll touch on briefly in this video. So rather, these teachings say, the Bailey teachings and theosophical teachings, that masters want us to learn to move past a focus of fulfillment on our desires for money, sex, pleasure, and power. That emphasis on money, sex, pleasure, and power and getting stuff for me is primarily humanity focused down here on what we would call the emotional plane. We've talked about that in many videos on the Soul to Spirit channel. When we move on to the mental plane, which is in here, here's the plane of the lower mind beyond, or here's the plane of the lower mind. Below these dots, here's the plane of the soul or the solar angel. Up here in these three levels above these dots where this egoic lotus or causal body or soul is, that mental plane is where we're on the spiritual path because we're cultivating the mind. We're learning on the plane of the lower mind to think more logically, reasonably, scientifically, regardless of your ray makeup. That's what we're learning how to do. but it's not yet filled with love and soul qualities. That only happens when we get up here, and then we have more love in the mind. But we have a highly intelligent mind. And up here on this level, we're learning to not only use our minds, but to understand our thoughts, our conditioning of our thoughts, and to learn how to condition our minds by thinking only soul thoughts. And when we have mastery, only what we would call triadal thoughts. So back to here, we're going beyond any constant money, sex, pleasure, and power. Those things are greatly minimized, especially when we become a master. Now, some masters may be in charge of money and may wield outer power, but most of them have what we would consider very simple, maybe even extremely simple lives, because that's not the focus here. Accumulation of stuff, of outer power, of indulging in sex and pleasure. And that's why this spiritual path is so hard, because it's so opposite of what the overwhelming majority, maybe 99% of humanity, is involved with. Why? Because masters understand that true happiness only comes once we realize the self. At first, on the lower levels, as we're treading the spiritual path, we're realizing that self by developing our mind and aspiring to become the soul. Then, as we become the soul, we realize there is a higher self, the true self, the spiritual triad, and that's where the masters are. Now, eventually, the masters move on to become the monad, which up at this level, we're no longer human here. Masters at this level cannot incarnate in human form. That would be too much of a drop to come all the way down in here. Here's where we have the physical body, is in these levels here. So these would be avatars on the inner planes that never descend down. We're told in Externalization of the Hierarchy by Bailey, they can descend down, but they only come into the plane of the solar angel. That's as far as you can go up here. So masters are in this region here, and beyond that, masters are striving to go, but once they're at this level, they can no longer come down in human form. So they are first learning to become the soul, then the triad or the true self, and eventually the monad. As one does so, that person continues to realize the unity of all of life. That unity starts down here when we're taking the first and second initiations here on the plane of the lower mind, but it's more like a theory. It's an intellectual concept. It's not a realization, which happens in certain samadhi practices as we come into the plane of the solar angel, take the third and fourth initiations, and the fifth initiation lifts us up here into the spiritual triad. So we realize the unity of all of life. We expand the consciousness to embrace infinity. That's something that happens as we get into the monad up here. More and more, we're thinking about infinity. Now, the idea is to bring the monad ideally into the personality link so that there are some masters who are having increased monadic awareness that they can bring down into the personality level of the physical dense. But if they're only in the monad, they're not coming down. So when you hear about the monadic infused personality, that's really, again, the third and fourth initiations. And the fifth initiation of a master striving to have some monadic awareness coming down into the personality. And that, again, the focus is on infinity. Now, for those of you in the Bailey teachings, Michael Robbins wrote a great book called Infinitization of Consciousness that you can use starting whenever you want, but it's especially a book that is for training in the third and fourth initiations, moving into the fifth. We cultivate a wise understanding of the divine plan. What is that? That includes the destiny of our Earth within the larger cosmos. What is the Earth's purpose in our solar system? what is the purpose of our solar system within the larger cosmos that it exists inside, etc., etc. And you become a selfless server for the good in our world. So masters are always doing this. As we are first and second degree initiates, occasionally we may think about this kind of stuff. Third and fourth degree initiates up here are having experiences of this. Masters have stabilized in this. Their consciousness is always doing the kinds of things we just described here. Blavatsky stated that, quote, "The pursuit of happiness, as man understands the word, for the first step is sacrifice, the second renunciation." In other words, the pursuit of happiness is not what we are focused on. Rather, we're focused on sacrifice and renunciation, which to the average person is going to look like the opposite of happiness. Blavatsky also explained that the masters would not stoop for one moment to give a thought to individual private matters relating but to one or even 10 persons, their welfare, woes, and blisses in this world of Maya or illusion, to nothing except questions of really universal importance. So this, in other words, re-emphasizes the fact that the spiritual path is about sacrifice, service, surrender, renunciation, altruism, the well-being of all, and guiding humanity out of the emotional plane where they think life is only about money, sex, pleasure, and power, up into the mental plane where they begin to develop the mind and even the higher regions above that. What then are these masters concerned with, and what are they like? Let's look at some direct quotes now from the Bailey book, Letters on Occult Meditation, to find out. Now there's quite a list here. I'm only going to go through a few of them because so much of this video has been still an introduction to the masters in general, and then we'll complete more of them in another video. So here, obviously, I had the personality, the soul, the motive. So now let's look at that book and general characteristics of masters. We're going to start with this. A master of the wisdom is one who has undergone the fifth initiation. That really means that his consciousness has undergone such an expansion that it now includes the fifth or spiritual kingdom. He has worked his way through the four lower kingdoms, the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and the human, and has, through meditation and service, expanded his center of consciousness till it now includes the plane of spirit. And these quotes are all going to be from Letters on Occult Meditation. This was on page 259. And you see that this letter was written September 14th, 1920. Again, you're going to hear the male pronoun because I'm using exact quotes. Everybody, everywhere, used only the male pronoun, possibly throughout the entire globe at that time. But here we see that there are 5 kingdoms, and here we have them listed as they were talked about back then at this time. Now, you can go on, do a Google search about 5 kingdoms, and you're going to get a different kind of interpretation than this. But this is what these teachings use. And human is where most of humanity is at. When you start the spiritual path and you go through the 5 initiations, then you are striving to become a master, but the master has undergone the 5th initiation, which anchors the master firmly within the 5th or spiritual kingdom. They are realized the self. That self is a spiritual triad. As we enter the 5th kingdom, we start with the 1st and 2nd initiations that help us to understand how to move within the plane of the lower mind, develop the mind, and think more scientifically, rationally, logically. At the 3rd and 4th initiations, we're moving into the plane of the solar angel, where we're cultivating the qualities of the soul, where we're bringing love into the mind, and we are living according to the qualities of the soul more, compassion, wisdom, etc. When we get into the fifth initiation, we're moved firmly into the triad, the true self, the Sat Chit Ananda. Quote, a master of the wisdom is one who has effected the transfer of polarization from the three atoms of the personal life as included in the causal body into the three atoms of the spiritual triad. He is consciously spirit, intuition, abstract mind, or Atma Buddhi Manas. And this is not potentially, but in full effective power realized through experience. This has been brought about, as earlier said, through the process of meditation. Now, everything in bold is me putting it in bold, just to let you know here. Now, to help illustrate this, I am showing you a few things. First of all, you see these little, what seem like permanent atoms here. Here's monastic permanent atom, but it starts with something called the mental unit, the astral or emotional permanent atom, the physical permanent atom. So these little atoms need to be lifted so that they can move up to these three atoms up here, Atma, Buddhi, Manas. And the mental unit is what helps us through the soul make that bridge up to these three. You have these three that are going to make the bridge up to these three. Now that bridge happens in the following way. These three, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, are stored here. This is like an illustration of this egoic lotus or soul taken out here. And it is said to have 12 petals. And we're not going to get into what all those are here. That's just too complicated. But the three innermost petals represent those that surround the jewel, which is the monad, at the heart of the lotus. So the potential of the monad and the three atoms of the triad are stored within the central part of the jewel at the heart of the lotus. That's also known as Omanipadmium, the jewel at the heart of the lotus. But these three little atoms, which I have put here as different colors, are going to move as this egoic lotus or soul petal unfolds. Now, what does that mean? That means as we develop these soul qualities, the petals unfold. The qualities of the soul unfold like a flower unfolds until the soul qualities are fully evident in such a way that we are able to move up. What does that mean? That means that the soul qualities have unfolded in such a way that these three little atoms are revealed around the jewel, the monad, and where they're able to shift our focus of attention up into Atma, Buddhi, Manas. And when that happens, we are told that the fourth initiation takes place, the egoic lotus or soul disappears, and we're now firmly anchored in the spiritual triad. We're no longer in the causal body. We've transferred at the fifth initiation as a master the three atoms of the personal life, these three that have been stored in the soul here, have been transferred up into the spiritual triad, and the soul is dissolved or destroyed. Why is that? Because our focus of consciousness is no longer there. So we don't need this soul as an intermediary to help us with this process. We're now spirit, intuition, abstract mind. Spirit, intuition, abstract mind here on the mental plane, or Atma, Buddhi, Manas, or Sat. This is actually Chit Ananda, Sat Ananda Chit here. And this is not potentially, meaning it's not something that we've just had an experience of these expansions of consciousness. It is what they call in the East established. It is in full effective power. It is realized through experience. Our consciousness at mastery is regularly up in these high levels. And that is only brought about through the process of meditation. What is that meditation? It is samadhi meditation. It also involves Kriya Yoga, which is mentioned in Bailey's book, The Light of the Soul. But it is primarily samadhi meditation that takes us there. Why? Because that is the type of meditation that teaches us mastery of the mind and releases the mind up into these higher levels. So again, we have this theme of Atma Buddhi Manas. A master of the wisdom is one who has found not only the chord of the ego, but the full chord of the monad, and can ring the changes therefore at will, upon all the notes from the lowest to that of the monadic. This means occultly that he has now developed the creative faculty and can sound the note for each plane and build thereon. This power, first to discover the notes of the monadic chord, and secondly to use those notes in constructive building, is first realized through meditation occultly performed, balanced by service, lovingly administered. So, here is the monad. Here is the monadic chord. Here is the triad, Atma Buddhi Manas. Here we could say is the masters who are now reaching the monad. And because they are reaching the monad, they're able to access the monadic chord. And they are attempting to sound that monadic chord or those realizations down into the chord of the ego or the soul. Back then, the word ego meant soul. It didn't mean the selfish personality. Here's the personality that we have now. This picture is meant to illustrate the first and second degree initiates on the spiritual path on the plane of the lower mind. This is meant to illustrate the initiates going through the third and fourth initiation, where they're fully developing those ego or soul qualities. So we could say that third and fourth initiates are able to sound the chord of the ego and are trying to learn to sound the chord of the triad. But the master is able to access the monadic chord and is able then to also sound the egoic chord and to bring that into creative activity within the three lower worlds of the personality, which is the lower mind, the emotions, and the physical body here. What is the master trying to create in the three lower worlds? The master is trying to create those planetary thought forms that serve the planet and that help the planet serve its role within our solar system and beyond. Think about that for a moment. What kind of consciousness do you have to every day of your life be involved with what is the planetary evolutionary process for all the kingdoms? How does it work? What is our planet's role within the solar system? We're even starting to think about what is the role of our solar system within the larger cosmos. What is the story here? The divine plan is the story that is trying to unfold to help spiritualize our planet, all the kingdoms within our planet, and to help move beyond that so that we can help our planet play its spiritual role to help our solar system spiritualized. These are things that the average human being living way down here isn't going to think about at all. But the master is using samadhi meditation to access these things, Kriya Yoga meditation to continue to purify the chakras in the body in order to impress these monadic chord notes, ideas, thoughts onto those who reside down here, the first and second, and mainly the third and fourth degree initiates. They are acting as the bridge, accessing this stuff here, this cord up here, and then trying to implant the realizations from accessing that monadic cord into primarily third and fourth degree initiates who are up here on the plane of the solar angels so they can do soul magic. That's what it is about here. Next, a master of the wisdom is he who can wield the law in the three worlds and can dominate all that evolves on those planes. By learning the laws of mind through the practice of meditation, he expands the laws of mind till they embrace the laws of the universal mind as demonstrated in lower manifestation. The laws of mind are mastered in meditation. They are applied in the life of service, which is the logical outcome of true knowledge. And again, the laws of mind are mastered in meditation, are again knowing how to go into samadhi. So what are the three lower worlds here? They're the mental world, the emotional world, and the physical world. So the master of wisdom is again trying to access universal mind up here on the monadic plane and demonstrate that in the three lower worlds. Now what you see over here is what I've taken from a previous chart I've done, which talks about the meditation practice that the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali take us through. Here is ordinary mind. Most human beings down here in the emotional level. Monkey mind just jumps around thinking thoughts from here to there, very scattered, and maybe the way that their minds get focused is they're thinking about food, or a lot of them are obsessed about sex because that's one of the only times their minds are focused and they get to go beyond their mind for a moment of what they call ecstatic release. That's nothing, that little bit of ecstasy compared to the ecstasies up here, so to speak. But that's what most human beings are involved in, and they think if they get power, they can get more money, more stuff, more sex, more pleasure, and dominate everybody else down here. Those are groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that we've talked about in the mini Soul to Spirit videos. But as you enter meditation practice, you move into pratyahara, where you're able to focus the mind a little bit more. Dharana, where you're able to focus it consistently more, but not completely. And dharana is primarily the practice, pratyahara is primarily the practice of the lower mind along with dharana. When you get into dhyana, which is up here, dhyana, that's mainly the practice of the plane of the solar angel. That's where you're able to take your seed thought, your mantra, your alambana, it's also called, and repeat it in a very fixed way to the point where you have savitarka samadhi, again, which is part of the plane of the solar angel, which primarily third and fourth degree initiates are focused on, where the mind is very, very concentrated and able to bring through insights that are starting to come from the triad and starting to come from the impression of the masters on that person's mind, because those thoughts are so elevated. But when we get to the next step, we reach savichara, which is where we're starting to feel like we're going beyond the mind, but we still have a sense of I-ness. I am going beyond the mind. Why the I-ness? Because the soul in Eastern traditions is the ahamkara. It is the sense of I. I am doing this meditation. But eventually you move beyond that and you enter into sa-ananda, where there is no sense of I am doing this meditation. I am having these realizations. It goes beyond that. And there are samadhi meditation levels that go beyond even sa-ananda, Sa Asmita, and Nirvikalpa, and then eventually you move into Dharma Mega Samadhi. Go to the Understanding Samadhi series if you want to learn about that. Those are the samadhis that the masters are involved in. But as they access those things, they are trying to bring that down to the third and fourth degree initiates so that they too can dominate these three lower worlds. Masters have dominated the physical body. They know how to use it effectively. They understand how it works. They understand its mechanism. They understand how to feed and care for it if they're in one. They even, something that we'll talk about later, know how to dissolve it and make it reappear. They have mastered the emotions. They are in perfect equanimity emotionally. They don't have highs and lows. They've mastered the mind. They know what to think whenever they want to think something. They think it. They direct their minds when to think, when not to think at will. And that gives a tremendous amount of power in the mind so that when the mind is used, when words are spoken, they have very powerful impact, which is why you will see some masters choose to barely speak at all, using primarily telepathic impression. And again, when they're using telepathic impression, they're not going to be trying to talk to individuals about how to make their lives better. That would be the person's soul. Masters aren't going to talk to a small group and tell them how special they are and they're in touch with masters and aren't they wonderful and here's how they can get money, etc., etc. None of that is what masters are concerned with, and we will go more into that in another video as we continue this series in part 3. So the 10 evolutionary group series continues with our further videos coming about group 10, and you can look for those by joining the patreon.com Soul to Spirit channel. They are available temporarily on YouTube, and then they're put into the archives on the Patreon channel. If you want to become a patron, it costs very little to do so, and you are able to access all of the videos. We have over 200 videos on that channel, and you can access them for just a month if you like, or you can continue to support this work, which helps me continue to do these videos. Thanks for watching.